Okay, hello everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. We will begin. Thank you for joining the 7th virtual event of New Conversations 2.0 initiative, a virtual tour building on the 2018 Provincial Awareness Tour around the demographic realities, as well as the labor market challenges facing.
Autour des défis en matière de démographie et du marché du travail du Nouveau-Brunswick.
Qui suit la première tournée de sensibilisation de 2018 autour des défis démographiques et du marché du travail.
Tour building on
Choose the language of your choice on the lower right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. Cet événement est bilingue et nous avons
This event is bilingual and we have simultaneous interpretation. You can choose language
à la droite. Nous visitons 15 différentes régions dans la province, apportant des données sur le remplacement de la main-d'œuvre, des informations sur l'importance de l'immigration pour les finances publiques du Nouveau-Brunswick, les impacts de l'immigration future sur le système clé de la province et l'impératif pour les gouvernements locaux et les communautés de s'organiser en soutien de l'immigration au niveau local. We are also making the space for people, employers, community members, newcomers to share their stories and experiences of immigration. People are coming into our province and everyone has a role to play in the creation of communities and workplaces where the notions of diversity, inclusion, and equity are valued and at the heart of policies, processes, and planning. L'immigration est un sujet en constante évolution au Nouveau-Brunswick et de nouvelles conversations sont encore nécessaires pour s'assurer que nos nouveaux résidents trouvent des possibilités et un soutien significatif afin qu'ils choisissent d'appeler le Nouveau-Brunswick et vos communautés leur chez eux. Today, we dedicate this session to the Fredericton region. Before we dive in, I would like to acknowledge the unceded Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy territories we currently stand on, and we wish to thank them for allowing us to gather. Reconnaître la terre est une façon d'exprimer notre gratitude envers ceux dont nous sommes sur leur territoire, une façon d'honorer les peuples autochtones qui vivent et travaillent sur ces terres depuis des temps immémoriaux. Il est important de comprendre la longue histoire qui nous a menés à résider sur ces terres et d'honorer cette histoire alors que nous continuons à accueillir de nouvelles familles et travaillons ensemble à avancer sur la voie de la réconciliation. Je tiens également à remercier nos bailleurs de fonds et nos organisations partenaires qui ont contribué à cet événement. Le gouvernement du Nouveau-Brunswick et Travail NB, l'Agence de promotion économique du Canada Atlantique, le Conseil d'entreprise du Nouveau-Brunswick, l'Association francophone des municipalités du Nouveau-Brunswick, le Conseil économique du Nouveau-Brunswick, Tech Impact, Dialogue NB, le réseau en immigration francophone du Nouveau-Brunswick, la coopérative de développement régional, l'Université du Nouveau-Brunswick, l'Université de Moncton, le Brunswick Community College, le Collège communautaire du Nouveau-Brunswick et la Commission des droits de la personne. For this particular virtual event, I would like to thank the City of Fredericton, the Multicultural Association of Fredericton, Ignite Fredericton, the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, and the Fredericton Local Immigration Partnership. And finally, before introducing our special speakers for today, I have the obligation to set some ground rules and mention some housekeeping items in order to ensure that this is a productive experience for everyone, including the audience. So for this event, we have four parts. We will start with a presentation from our resident economists, David Campbell and Richard Saillant. We'll have a brief session for Q&A with them, followed by 4 breakouts and a period of report back and the discussion before we close. We want this event to mean something to you, so please engage with questions in the chat function within Zoom. As the facilitator, I will be picking a few and asking them during the Q&A period. However, if you also would like to, you can definitely chime in yourself, ask your questions or make comments. Please use the raise hand function and we will let you know when you're about to speak. So we'll give you the permission to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we ask you to keep your microphones on mute unless told otherwise, just to avoid any background noise or sound feedback. And we encourage you to turn on your cameras. It's always better to see faces rather than just stare at names, as we were trying to engage during this event. So it's going to lead to a more meaningful engagement. If we have a tech interruption, please stay with us. There's also always a risk of something like that happening when we try something like this live. But try to stay with us and hopefully we'll be avoiding any disruptions today. This session will be recorded, and we are providing, as I mentioned, simultaneous interpretation. So please choose the language of your choice, and you will be able to view the session following this event on the New Conversations website. And with that, I would like to introduce the Mayor of Fredericton, Mayor O'Brien, for some opening remarks. Your Worship, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody, and welcome. Bonjour, Kwe. It's a gorgeous day here in Fredericton. I'm at my home office here right now, and right over top of my screen, I'm looking out a window to a beautiful sunny day and some trees and some melting snow. So it's spring is in the air. Don't forget to set your clocks ahead this weekend, and it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful year in Fredericton. It's hard to believe that almost 2 years has passed since the first session that was held in 2018 here in Fredericton. And since then, there's been a lot of activity. During this term as mayor, this has been a 5-year term, we have had 250 startups happen in the city of Fredericton as a minimum. I know it's higher than that, but I can document that many. And about 1,900 related jobs because of startups. And again, it's probably higher than that. And who's behind a lot of this? First of all, the passionate people that make it work, but a lot of newcomers to our community.
Également des nouveaux arrivants. Beaucoup de nouveaux arrivants créent des occasions et une forme de richesse pour notre ville. Il nous incombe d'apprendre de la séance d'il y a 2 ans et de ce suivi, de faire que nous soyons encore plus accueillants, plus de soutien, une collectivité qui accueille tous les nouveaux arrivants dans la communauté. En 2016, j'étais tellement fier de notre ville quand nous avons accueilli pendant la crise de la Syrie. La ville de Fredericton a accueilli
most refugees to our community. The Fredericton Friends came forward, embraced everybody, helped, and the newcomers the Syrian refugees at that point that have stayed here have really led to the vibrancy and increased modernization of our city. And that was just a start. So since then, the Fredericton Local Immigration Partnership has really got formed, doing some great work with their subcommittees. But the province of New Brunswick has a focus, as they should, on immigration. So does the federal government. So must the city of Fredericton and all our great partners that are online here today, because our future depends on it. In the last 5 years, the city's grown by 8,000 to 9,000 people, of which 3,400 of those, I'm told, are landed immigrants, landed newcomers. So just put that in perspective. We're doing well, and we're doing well because of newcomers. And we're going to continue to blossom as a capital city and one of the most modern small cities in North America because of newcomers. So we must get better at this. We're doing well. We can always do better, and we will. So sessions like this will bring us to that point. So I'm looking forward to hearing the speakers, the breakout sessions. Thanks for putting this on. It's critically important. Have a great and wonderful day and a wonderful year ahead. So thank you very much, and take care, and Willie one. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you for being with us today. Maintenant, j'aimerais vous présenter nos économistes. En premier, M. Richard Saillant, économiste et consultant en politique publique. Richard est basé à Moncton et un ancien cadre du secteur public avec 20 ans d'expérience dans les milieux gouvernementaux et universitaires. Il a passé près de 15 ans à Ottawa dans divers
and you had 15 years in Ottawa in various departments.
Et Transport Canada. Il a écrit ou réalisé 4 livres, dont Au bord du gouffre, agir maintenant pour éviter la faillite du Nouveau-Brunswick, et 2 pays, le Canada à l'ère du grand déséquilibre démographique. We also have the second lead economist in the province, Mr. David Campbell. David is the former chief economist for the New Brunswick Job Board and founded his own economic development consulting and research firm, Jupia Consultants, Inc. in 2008. Based in Moncton, he is one of Atlantic Canada's leading economic development consultants. He has worked with
Consultants en 2018 et basé à Moncton est un des consultants de
agencies, industry associations, and government departments in 6 different Canadian provinces and 2 American states. He holds a certificate in economic development from the University of Waterloo in Ontario and an MBA from Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. Hello, Richard and David. Thank you for being with us once again. The screen is yours.
All right, I'm going to start. I'll be speaking in French, talking for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll hand it over to David. On the agenda today is to provide you with a brief picture of Fredericton's demographic situation. Then we're going to look into scenarios for future population growth and future labor force growth for the Fredericton area. And after that, talk a bit about the business planning element of growing our population within the Fredericton area. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, which is something that OK, je vais passer en français en passant, là. Et puis, on va commencer avec une discussion du défi démographique de la région de Fredericton. La région de Fredericton se porte, comme l'a dit son Excellence, Monsieur le maire, se porte très bien et on va le voir dans les chiffres ici.
We'll see the figures here. To discuss this, we will focus on the Fredericton census agglomeration. That includes the city of Fredericton, Hanwell Rural Community, the villages of Harvey, New Maryland, and Tracy, 2 First Nations community, Devon and Kingsclear, as well as the parishes of Bright, Douglas, Gladstone, Kingsclear, Lincoln, Manners, Sutton, Magerville, New Maryland, Queensbury, and St. Mary's. So when we're going to talk about the census agglomeration, that's what we're talking about. So let's start by looking at the overall picture. We compared New Brunswick demographic situations out of Canada. The message here, it's pretty concise to indicate that New Brunswick is older and is aging more rapidly than Canada. When you look at the slide like that, you see New Brunswick, the generation that continues to dominate the age pyramid, it's the baby boom generation, 55 to 75 approximately. In Canada, baby boomers are no longer dominating that pyramid. It's been passed by the millennials. So if it's an aging population, you don't focus on the more aged element of society. You have to concentrate on, you have to focus on if there are young people coming behind the older generations to refresh the population. So now let's concentrate on comparing Fredericton to the rest of the country. It's my great pleasure to speak to you today. Fredericton is doing really well on this front in terms of demographic aging, given the young people coming into the census agglomeration. You see that in the youth cohort from 0 to 14, from 15 to 24, or 25 to 40.
En déclin sur l'ensemble de la province, du moins au cours de la dernière décennie. En bleu se trouve Fredericton. J'ai le plaisir de vous annoncer que Fredericton a connu une plus forte croissance de son nombre de jeunes que l'ensemble du Canada au cours des 10 dernières années. Et pour ce qui est des jeunes adultes en âge de travailler, il y a eu une croissance globale. Dans les 15-24 ans, c'est à peu près stable, mais il y a eu une croissance globale qui se compare à peu près au Canada. Donc, la trajectoire de Fredericton illustre fortement ce qui se produit lorsqu'on accueille de nouveaux immigrants au sein de notre collectivité. Ici, normalement, c'est là où je vous donne un aperçu de comment le Nouveau-Brunswick se compare au Canada au niveau de son économie, mais aussi comment la région de Fredericton se comparerait à celle de l'ensemble du Nouveau-Brunswick. Malheureusement, je ne peux pas le faire ici parce que les données sur la population active à Fredericton de Statistique Canada sont hautement douteuses. Les chiffres indiquent qu'au cours de la dernière décennie, il n'y a eu aucune croissance de la population active, du moins selon l'enquête sur la population active. Je n'y crois pas. Et puis, c'est parce qu'il y a eu on ne compte pas suffisamment tous les employeurs au sein de la région de Fredericton. Donc, pour ceux qui sont intéressés à ce sujet-là, vous pouvez faire davantage de recherches. Au niveau de l'enquête de la population active, c'est un peu bizarre pour la région, l'agglomération urbaine de Fredericton. Mais le message clé, c'est que si une société vieillit plus rapidement, sa croissance va être beaucoup plus faible. Si vous regardez sur le graphique à gauche, vous allez voir que le PIB réel au Canada a connu une croissance beaucoup plus forte qu'au Nouveau-Brunswick. Et la raison principale, c'est que la population active au Canada a continué de croître de manière assez robuste, plus de 10% pour la dernière décennie, alors que dans l'ensemble du Nouveau-Brunswick, il y a eu un déclin. Donc, ça illustre l'enjeu ici, l'importance d'avoir une population active qui est en croissance. Ici, on va vous donner un peu l'essence du défi de Fredericton. Ce que vous voyez ici, c'est en rouge, c'est ceux qui atteignent l'âge officiel de la retraite de 65 ans à chaque année. Et en gris, c'est ceux qui atteignent l'âge officiel de travailler de 15 ans chaque année. Le défi à Fredericton est beaucoup moindre par rapport à certaines autres régions de la province. Il y a des endroits dans la province où il y a 2 fois plus de personnes qui atteignent l'âge de 65 ans que de gens qui atteignent l'âge de 15 ans. Donc, vous voyez l'impact du fait d'accueillir de nouveaux arrivants. Vous le voyez là sur un graphique comme celui-ci. Et je vous dirais que l'écart que vous voyez là, qui est d'environ peut-être 200 personnes, il est entièrement comblé par l'immigration. raison pour laquelle on soupçonne que la région de Fredericton connaît une croissance de sa population active, une croissance qui, à mon sens, doit être quand même assez robuste. Maintenant, on va voir l'impact très rapidement, parce que David va en parler bientôt, l'impact de justement d'accueillir davantage de nouveaux arrivants au sein de votre collectivité. C'est que les nouveaux arrivants sont typiquement de jeunes adultes en âge d'élever des enfants. Donc, ils permettent d'augmenter le taux de naissance, mais aussi de faire croître la population étudiante. En gris, avec l'axe de gauche, vous voyez que la région de Fredericton, depuis l'accueil des réfugiés syriens, disons 2015-2016, a connu une croissance très rapide de son nombre de jeunes âgés, de population d'âge scolaire, entre 5 et 18 ans. Comme vous le voyez, c'est passé d'autour de 15 500 à plus de 17 000 à l'intérieur d'une demi-décennie, alors que pour le reste du Nouveau-Brunswick, c'est plus stable. Mais on voit quand même que le nombre de personnes d'âge scolaire a cessé de diminuer dans l'ensemble du Nouveau-Brunswick. Donc, Fredericton est un cas qui illustre la puissance de l'accueil de nouveaux arrivants pour rafraîchir nos rangs et augmenter notre population d'âge scolaire. Mais quand même, des défis restent majeurs à l'échelle du Nouveau-Brunswick. Un graphique comme celui-ci l'illustre. Si vous regardez le secteur public, il a connu une croissance, ça c'est l'axe de droite, vous voyez en rouge, il a connu une croissance de l'emploi. Donc ça, c'est l'emploi dans le secteur de la santé, secteur de l'éducation un peu, mais aussi le secteur des soins aux personnes âgées, alors que l'emploi dans le secteur privé a décru. Au cours de la dernière décennie, c'est autour de 15 000 emplois qui ont été perdus dans le secteur privé. Donc, c'est une tendance qui va dans la mauvaise direction parce que pour défrayer les coûts de services publics qui sont plus grands, il va falloir avoir davantage de main-d'œuvre dans le secteur privé pour générer les impôts nécessaires. Donc, il faut avoir une croissance des deux secteurs, pas juste du secteur public. Et puis, je vais terminer avec une dernière diapositive qui vous illustre le défi à venir. C'est les pressions induites par le vieillissement sur les dépenses de santé. Ceci, c'est uniquement les pressions induites par le vieillissement. Ce n'est pas les coûts de technologie ou encore l'inflation générale, les salaires, etc. Donc, juste parce que le fait que notre population vieillit. Et j'ai souvent dit qu'on a seulement vu le point de l'iceberg en ce qui a trait aux pressions sur les dépenses publiques. Un graphique comme celui-ci l'illustre. Présentement, le baby boomer le plus âgé a 75 ans. Okay? Donc, les dépenses de santé passe d'environ 6 000 à l'âge de 65 ans, 6 000 par habitant, à 24 000 à l'âge de 85 ans. Donc, les coûts croissants, les pressions croissantes, c'est dans les prochaines années qu'on va les voir. Le nombre de personnes âgées de 75 ans et plus va doubler, passant d'environ, plus que doubler, passant d'environ 65 000 à environ 140 000 dans 15 ans d'ici. Donc, les pressions, vous les voyez, d'ici 4 ans, des pressions supplémentaires d'à peu près 350 millions de dollars. D'ici 9 ans, 2030, des pressions supplémentaires d'environ 700 millions de dollars annuellement. Et d'ici 14 ans, 2035, comme vous le voyez, près de 1,1 milliard de dollars uniquement induites par le vieillissement. Ça nous donne encore une fois l'importance d'augmenter notre population active un peu partout. Et à cet égard, Fredericton fait bonne figure et contribue justement à rendre l'économie néo-brunswickoise plus prospère. Donc, je vais m'arrêter ici. Je vais passer maintenant le flambeau à David. Donc, je vais arrêter de partager mon écran et je vais me taire. Voilà. It's over to you, David.
Okay, merci, Richard. I hope everybody can hear me now. We've got the mic unmuted. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. So basically what I'm going to talk a little bit about is, just hold on, there we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about population growth and education. Richard touched on it a little bit earlier, and then I'm going to go right into a discussion about population growth forecast for the Fredericton region, and I think that's going to show some very interesting trends specifically for the Fredericton region. So basically, as Richard said, the reality is that most of the immigrants coming to our province are younger. They're not necessarily young professionals. We're seeing a good mix of young families with young children. And so already those young immigrant families are boosting the population in the K-12 education system. We're seeing that specifically right now in Fredericton and Moncton, but that's good news because as more people retire, if we have more people in the education system, that's the talent pipeline for the workforce in the years ahead. So this is just a quick thing, and we did issue a press release. If you want the full details on this and all the backup information, that's now available on the Multicultural Council's website. But you can see here the blue bars are the population born in New Brunswick. And the gray bar here is the population of immigrants and international students. So the projections are that among those born in Canada, we're going to see a fairly steep decline, about 7,000 lost in the next decade across the province. But you can see here, if we continue to see growth in our immigration numbers, if we hit the 7,500 target by 2024 and increase after that, you will see, based on the assumptions that we made in this model, that immigrant students will more than overtake the loss in New Brunswick-born population, and that will boost the overall K-12 enrollment across the province. So now let's talk a little bit about the Fredericton region's population growth projections. We've done this for all of the communities we looked at around the province. I will say that anytime you do a population projection like this, it's really just one potential trajectory. Even when Statistics Canada does its population forecast, they're never really on the mark. They do a whole bunch of different scenarios to account for different trends. So these three that I'm going to show you for the Fredericton region are an indication of where things could go based on the current trajectory and based on two other forecast set of assumptions. And the good news is Fredericton has done very, very well. And if it continues to do as well as it has, it will continue to grow, and it will exceed forecasted population over the next 20 years. But why do we need to grow the population in the Fredericton region? Well, we have a number of strategically important industries, and we have new growth opportunities. So fundamentally, no matter what happens in the workforce and in the economy with technology, we're still going to need to have workers for many of our key industries in the region. There's over 3,000 businesses in the Fredericton area with employees. And there is a risk that many would leave if workforce demand can't be addressed. So as Richard said earlier, we're seeing more need for workers in the public sector. But if there's not enough workers overall, we'll see declines in the private sector, particularly in industries that are export focused. So these are the three scenarios we looked at. One is the current population trajectory. So as I indicated earlier, for a lot of areas in the province, that's actually not a very pretty picture. So what we're arguing around the province is that we need to move off the current trajectory and look toward growth scenarios in those areas. But in Fredericton, actually, the current population trajectory is strong. And then scenario two is the population growth we need to see in the Fredericton region to at least maintain the current size of the workforce. And scenario three is the population growth needed to expand the workforce at an average annual rate of 0.5%. So why these three scenarios? Well, first of all, we want to show the community what the trajectory is right now, projected out over the next 20 years. And for the Fredericton region, as we've said earlier, it's really good. Scenario two is the population growth needed to maintain the current size of the workforce. And we just want to show around the province that everywhere is going to need population growth if we want to keep the same size workforce, because we're going to have more people retiring. Therefore, we're going to need more young people joining the workforce. And scenario three is population growth needed to expand the workforce at an average annual rate of 0.5%, not compounded growth rate, but just 0.5% on an average basis over the period of 20 years. Okay, so this is the one. So basically, based on the assumptions that we've made, and you can download the report that includes all of the assumptions and the methodology we used, we basically took Statistics Canada's forecasted population growth for New Brunswick. They do not provide population projections at the metropolitan or at the census agglomeration area. So I had to estimate that, but we started as a baseline with the provincial numbers, and then we adjusted based on what's going on in each of the areas. And basically, we're looking on current trend. We're looking at a population increase in the Fredericton region of 29%. And we're looking at a 23% increase in the workforce, or an additional 13,500 people in the workforce between now and 2040. So two very good numbers, very solid growth rate that assumes we're going to continue to see very strong population growth, and much of that will be driven by newcomers coming to Canada and settling in the Fredericton region. And if we get this, It will mean we have the workforce for growth in our export-focused industries, in our tech sector, in tourism and other important industries, but also in those very important public sector industries in the Fredericton region. So again, unlike a lot of areas in the province, this is actually a step down from the current trajectory. But if we want to just maintain the current workforce size, which in the Fredericton region is about 59,400, the population must increase over the 20-year period by about 9.5% or 10,500 on a net basis. So we would need to grow the population in the Fredericton region by just under 10%, and that would allow the workforce to stay at 59,400. But it would represent a significant decline. So we're growing now in the Fredericton region at an average annual rate of about 1.5% per year, and that would drop us to 0.5. So of course, anything can happen as we look out to the future. We could hit recession. There's a number of other things that could happen. But really what we're talking about in Fredericton is sustaining our 1.5% per year population growth rate to drive increase in the workforce and the opportunities for economic growth. And if we only were able to maintain the current size of the workforce, as I indicated earlier, there'd be more pressure for workers in the public sector. So we would end up probably losing a lot of our export-focused industries in the Fredericton area. And if we look more broadly at the greater Fredericton region around agriculture, tourism, and natural resources, all of those opportunities would be more challenging without the workers. The third scenario is a modest workforce growth. Remember, we're already at above this in the last 5 years of the Fredericton region, and we're already projecting a better growth rate than this. But if you dropped back to a modest 0.5% per year workforce growth rate, you would need to grow the population over the next 20 years by 17.5% or just under 20,000. And that will give us a workforce increase of 5,500. And you can see what's going on there. Because we have so many more retiring, we need to have a much greater population growth relative to workforce growth in order to grow the workforce overall. And that's the same wherever you go in the province. So this would require a population growth rate of 0.9% per year, again, well below what we're actually seeing in the Fredericton region. So a couple of conclusions. My advice is to keep doing what you're doing, current course and speed. If we continue to bring in immigrants at over a rate of 100 per 10,000 or 1% per year, the rate we've seen in the Fredericton region, if we continue to retain them, that's going to be good news. I think the one thing when you look at the Fredericton numbers in particular, you do lose a fair amount to interprovincial migration. So over the last 5 years, you've lost an average of 400 per year to net interprovincial migration, and that's well above most of your peers. So I'm not sure why that is. It might have to do with a lot of factors there, but I think what we would want to do is reduce that net interprovincial migration closer to zero. You're always going to lose some people to migration, but you want to minimize that as much as possible. And then finally here, we have to ensure there's good housing options for people moving into the region. This is a growing challenge across the province, but people are retiring, but they're not actually moving. So that when they retire, they open up a spot in the workforce, but we need to make sure we have the housing for the people that are moving into the region to fill those spots in the workforce. And the housing has to be appropriate to the population moving in and to the household income of the population moving in. So this is just a series of slides we take for every community around the province. And I would say Fredericton is doing a really good job on this front, but we do need communities to get engaged. It's not only a provincial government issue. We can't assume that. We do need local leadership, and we are seeing that in the Fredericton area. That's among the businesses, that's among local government. And ultimately, the argument here is that people and businesses move into local communities. Economic opportunities occur in the local communities. They don't occur at the provincial level, right? Decisions are made really at the local level. And there's more on this in the report that you can download, but basically we're arguing that local government is being asked to do a lot more in 2021 than it did 20 or 30 years ago. There's more about attracting people, promoting the community, a lot more focus on quality of life now, because we really have to be good places to live if we want to attract and retain population. We have to promote ourselves. We have to worry about economic opportunities. So there's really a lot more going on for local government now than there was 20 or 30 years ago, and they have to have the resources and the focus to work on all of those issues. So that's why, and again, you'll see this in the document, that you can't just have a population growth plan. You have to have a more comprehensive business plan. In other words, you have to understand what comes with a population growth plan. And that's an understanding of labor market needs. That's an understanding of what industries and economic development opportunities there are. But it also includes things like housing and local support infrastructure and language training and all of the things that go around that population growth plan. And again, I would say the stakeholders in the Fredericton area are doing a good job at this, but moving forward, we have to continue to ensure there's a lot more here. If we want to sustain 1.5% annual population growth, all of those other pieces have to be in place, or it could crimp your future growth potential. So that's it for my presentation. So I'm going to turn it back, I guess, for questions and answers. Happy to try and answer any questions you might have, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Richard and David. We will be going into the Q&A section, so please feel free to include your questions in the chat, or also you can chime in person by using the raise hand function. I did see Mr. Constantine Pesseris with his hand up. Constantine, if you would like to ask your question yourself, feel free to do so now. We'll give you the chance to unmute.
All right. Thanks very much, Nicole, and thanks to everybody for your presentation. You've been doing this for a while now, so my question is overarching beyond Fredericton. Can somebody tell me if there are different priorities in terms of immigration between northern New Brunswick and southern New Brunswick, between the Anglophone communities of New Brunswick and the Francophone communities of New Brunswick? And thank you very much.
Perhaps I could start, and David, feel free to chime in anytime. I have been doing a few presentations up north right now, and what I would say is that compared to 3 years ago, we're in an entirely different world. People now are not only familiar with the need to raise immigration levels, they're extremely familiar with the challenges associated with raising immigration levels. And what I'm seeing is that various regions across, we can't just say that urban is different from rural and French is different from English. Within the northern New Brunswick, there are very important differences in terms of levels of awareness and level of progression. Sorry, not level of awareness. Level of awareness is there, but level of progression on the file. Some communities still have major issues with drawing more immigrants, but others are progressing very well. What I'm also seeing is that all communities are raising housing as a major challenge. Virtually all communities are raising housing as a major challenge. So I would say that on the Francophone side, there is obviously an awareness of the issue of ensuring regional balance in not regional, but linguistic balance. But there's also a concern at this point that the overall flows are not sufficient and that it is affecting employers across the board, and some are finding it difficult to find people who have the linguistic qualifications, including being bilingual in many communities.
Yeah, so I would just echo that. I think we're at a point now where we can't just assume growth in one or two large urban centers will carry the whole province, even if you thought that was a fair outcome. The reality is we've got challenges across the entire province, and I think it's this issue of equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, right? Not to use that metaphor, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that every community has the opportunity to grow and that has the opportunity to attract population, understanding that every community is different. Every community has different assets and attributes and different potential for growth. But if we choke off the labor market, you can be sure, no matter where you are in the province, it's going to be very, very hard to grow. And some of the implications of that, which Richard has written eloquently about, are, we just don't want to go there. We don't want to spend the next 20 years, continuing to fight about what we're closing, and this hospital closes and road closures and school closures and everything else. We would rather kind of manage the challenges of growth which is what we're arguing for, getting the population growth numbers up in rural and urban and northern New Brunswick.
Great, thank you very much, Richard and David. One question came in and it's regarding retention. What can we do better to retain newcomers? What aren't we doing? What's the next step in that retention strategy?
I'll let you start, David.
Sure. So everything starts with a good economic opportunity. And so if somebody can't find an economic opportunity aligned with their skills and interests, it's very, very difficult to see them staying in the long run. Now, some people will take a small pay cut, or they'll take some reduction in order to stay in a community that they love. But in general, it all starts with economic opportunity, and that starts with targeting and making sure that folks, that are coming to New Brunswick can find that economic opportunity. The Atlantic Immigration Pilot Project was meant to help that. And I think we're getting better at that. And I think there's more work to be done there. But beyond that, we do have to be welcoming communities. We have to do as much as possible to help newcomers integrate into social networks, into churches, into mosques, into synagogues, into the kind of retention elements that keep them here. And by the way, schools are a big part of that. So it's pretty strategic for the government to be targeting young families, because if the children are doing well in schools, it's very, it's harder to up and leave. Now, having said that, the kids have to be doing well in school. So you have to make sure that our school systems are geared towards supporting newcomer children. In many cases, there's language issues and so on. So we have to invest properly in our school system. But if we can get that right, if we can get the retention pieces right, I think in the longer term, more and more newcomers will stay, and that will help support our workforce needs and our economy in the long run.
Great, thank you, David. Richard, do you have anything to add?
Very little to add. I fully agree with David. The only thing I would say is that when we are looking at retention outcomes, we shouldn't be imposing standards that are typical of Ontario and larger provinces, because if you move from Ottawa to Toronto, you're not counted as an out migrant, okay? But if you move from Moncton to
regarder la rétention directement entre de ville en ville. Il faudrait regarder le Nouveau-Brunswick en général. Donc, il faut s'assurer de voir que
don't realize that certain communities can be very, very small, and without transportation opportunities, it's a challenge in many communities, and it needs to be communicated, while at the same time, the communities need to work on those challenges. So obviously, to me, is always, it's not managing, communicating. I said not managing expectations, it's communicating the realities appropriately. And then after that, if people leave, you know what? Many Canadians, many New Brunswickers leave also. It's part of being Canadian, and it's a constitutional right to migrate wherever it is that you find that is best suited for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. What populations of newcomers still remain untapped or not tapped as much as they can be by the labor market in the Fredericton region? David, Richard?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have an answer to that question. I mean, I have been saying for a number of years now that we need to look at needs up and down the labor market. And I think one of the challenges we have is things like jobs like in retail or part-time jobs and so on. And those are particularly challenging when you're thinking about immigration, because most immigrants aren't going to come here for a part-time job. Now, the children of immigrants will work in those jobs, and sometimes the spouses. So sometimes that's a benefit to immigration into urban centers, because you have a greater number of these secondary labor market opportunities in, say, retail or personal services or accommodation and food services. But at the end of the day, I don't know the specific to Fredericton. I know because it has such a good flow of immigrants, I think you're seeing immigrants in many, many different industries. And when the census comes out next year, the census that's being done this year, I think you'll see a good distribution of those newcomers across many different industries. But that's ultimately, if you look across Canada, that's what happens. Immigrants end up attaching to the labor market almost in similar proportion to other Canadians. in construction sector, in the food service sector, in manufacturing. Some sectors they concentrate more, but in general, we'd like to see newcomers in all sectors of the economy, and I think we'll see a better distribution when the census numbers come out next year.
Briefly, to add a bit to what David said, I would say that credentials recognition is obviously a big issue across the entire province and across Canada, and it's something that we really need to make progress on. But I would say, and I am not dismissing the progress that's been made to date, but all employers should be more opening up and having proactive measures to integrate newcomers, and that includes obviously the provincial public service, which is so important in Fredericton. I'm not saying that no work is being done. I'm saying that we need to make sure that all our public authorities, all the departments are reflective of the changing demographic realities of the province.
Great, thank you. And a final question. Is it realistic to expect this strong flow of immigrants to, keep on going in the Fredericton region? And if not, what could impair it, and what effect has the pandemic had?
If I may start, and I'm going to be very brief, I would say that it is not realistic if we cannot address our housing shortage, our housing situation, and that applies to the entire province. I suspect this year that Fredericton and St. John seem to have had a respite because there seem to have been lower immigration flows in those communities. But in Moncton, the vacancy rates are near record levels, and the prices of lower priced units are escalating. Same as happening in Bathurst. I think in Bathurst, the rent increases, the average was about 10% this year. So across the province, finding affordable housing is going to be critical. And just as much as in the past, we spent thousands of dollars on creating jobs and subsidizing jobs and providing tax breaks to employers, we should start thinking in the same lines in terms of welcoming newcomers and reallocating those fundings towards making sure that we have the conditions in place to welcome many more newcomers. We're thinking about reverting to where we were before the pandemic and then doubling that. And I suspect that left to its own device, the market does not have the proper incentives to provide affordable housing, either in Fredericton or anywhere else in New Brunswick. And when I'm talking about affordable housing, I'm talking about housing that is kept affordable, not just the typical affordable housing, but all the lower priced units, like say rents below $1,000. This to me is the biggest bottleneck, and we're going to need to address it as communities, but also with the implication of Ottawa and the province, who will need to start thinking that this should be considered the lifeblood of the economy and therefore the first priority for reinvestment.
Yeah, so I'd expand on that quickly, that I think the external factors won't reduce immigration here. If there's a reduction in immigration in the coming years, it will be because of factors on the ground in our communities, such as housing. I think there's always going to be a demand. People want to live in Canada. It's a beautiful country to live. It has a lot going for it, along with Australia and a few other countries around the world. I'm not saying we can be complacent. We still have to work on being good places to live, but there's a demand for living in places like Canada, and we just have to make sure we're doing a good job of promoting ourselves and recruiting folks here. And then once they get here, making sure we have, the housing and the support and everything else needed to keep them here, as many as possible. I will say, I have to reiterate what Richard said earlier, like in a small jurisdiction like New Brunswick, you can never expect extremely high retention rates. We're not retaining our own people. So to assume that immigrant rates would be extremely high is difficult because there's just less opportunities in smaller urban centers or rural areas. So you're always going to have a little bit of churn in and out. And what I've said is for every one that leaves, you just need to have 1.5 coming in, and then you'll be able to grow. But I think I don't think they're going to be external factors that impact. It'll be local factors and government policy, right? If for some reason government decided they wanted to restrict the flow, but I think that if that happened would be a big mistake.
Great. Thank you so much, both David and Richard. We'll see you back during the discussion period after the breakouts. And we actually have the opportunity now to dive in some of these subjects that were touched upon by David and Richard. And obviously with the pandemic presenting unforeseen and unprecedented challenges, it's more important than ever to work together towards ensuring the retention, inclusion, and integration of newcomers in our region and to streamline pathways to permanency for our newcomers. Under the Pathways to Permanency overarching theme for today's virtual event, we're offering 4 breakouts that will provide insight into the following areas: the role of local governments and communities, the role of employers, their challenges and support needs, challenges related to housing, a topic that we've seen over and over during this tour, and certainly is a big one for today, as well as systemic racism and discrimination. So in each one, you will hear from one or more panelists that will dive into these topics, and we will encourage you to engage in a discussion around the barriers, the initiatives that are underway to tackle those barriers, other potential solutions, and concrete steps that can be taken in order to overcome those challenges as a community. So the 4 breakouts are community building, développement communautaire, the business sector and immigration, le secteur des affaires et l'immigration, housing, le logement, racism and systemic discrimination, le racisme et la discrimination systémique. Unfortunately, simultaneous interpretation is not available during the breakouts. However, we have ensured that either the facilitators or the note takers are bilingual, and they are prepared to support you with that language piece. We encourage you to engage in the language of your choice and to chime in person as well as through the chat. So now you can, we'll have you choose your breakout, and you'll have 30 minutes before coming back to the main room for report back and discussion.
Asif began by talking about the challenges in the sense of belonging and integration of immigrants to the larger community. And some of the barriers that came up while we were talking were, of course, housing, and mostly for larger families. We talked about the struggles of bringing family from outside of Canada back into Fredericton, and the programs that had previously been there and no longer are available, as well as we touched a little on healthcare access and understanding the different healthcare forms or programs that are available, and language barriers. For solutions, Asif gave a few great solutions, talking about learning from immigrants to find ways to support them. So having that conversation with the first person that identify those needs or face those gaps. Asif also shared a little bit about how he has been successful in having and building a relationship with international students as well as with marginalized groups, and listen to their perspectives and be able to share their voice with the community, as well as having a time to talk with immigrants in this hard times with COVID-19 in order to give them a little bit of empathy and be able to recognize that immigrants, not all of them have their family here and they might be isolated. And for the general ask, I have 2 notes. The first one being, how can we as a community help support immigrants and help retention? And the second ask being to reach out to immigrants to check in with them, just to make sure to how they're doing during these hard times due to COVID-19. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Asif and Seb, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next group?
I'll add a little bit. I didn't get a chance to kind of, because we had a little short time. So I heard a lot and I wrote down some notes. So whether it is about affordable housing, food program, or supporting parents, I think the common theme here, what's coming is we need, before we make any policies for attraction, settlement, or retention, it's important to have this kind of feedback at the policy level. When we're doing this consultation, it's very important to have representation at the level of decision making. Rather than being told what it is for me, I think it's important for people to have relatable experience to kind of design those policies together. So I think that is one of the key things that we are missing as a part of the community. We need more representation and the voices. And of course, like, one of the topic that came up, I believe two of the Susan and Sandy mentioned about giving the right to vote for permanent residents in the municipal election at least is one of the key way to share their voice and make them feel heard. So I just wanted to bring it up to the entire audience here. I think it's very important to listen to them through the through the democratic institution that we're already enjoying. So it's important to listen to the permanent residents at the early stage rather than later when it's too late. So that's for me. Thank you, everyone.
Seb, you're on mute.
The one thing I'd like to add is Sandy Lou's point is very good. Where do we get the opportunity to meet each other and deepen that type of understanding, right? We're all busy, we all have lives. When do we get the time that's practical, convenient, and have that interaction, right? So that we get to know each other. That's another question that should be a takeaway. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, all of you. And I definitely echo everything that's been said. If anybody from the other participants would like to chime in here, now is the time. So feel free to ask, any questions or comments in the chat, or also do the raise hand symbol, and I'll give you the opportunity to speak yourself. For group number 2, the business sector and immigration, Jeanette, do you have any takeaways that you would like to share? And feel free to share them in French or in English, language of your choice.
I'll share them in English because I jotted my notes in English. And Krista and Norm, please feel free to jump in if I missed anything. But we heard from Norm Couturier from 3D Planeta, and the main challenges that I heard from you, Norm, was mainly around matching the talent that's already in the province or that's available around the world with the opportunities here in Fredericton, and looking at how we can navigate immigration systems and the services that are available in our community to make sure that we can benefit from this talent that's around us. So 3D Planeta provided some great examples of working directly with some of our post-secondary institutions, UNB and NBCC particularly, to look at pathways to employment, so through internships and placements and an opportunity to explore that talent. And I think the big picture that I heard from you, Norm, is trying to get sort of some kind of playbook and some clear methodology and sort of a track for other employers to look at doing something similarly and working together, that there's no use in a single agency kind of doing all this work and navigating this whole system. The real impact will come when we're all working together and look at streamlining some of the services that are available. And we heard from one newcomer talking about, being aware of these work opportunities, and she got cut off right at the end, but from the newcomer side of things, it's the same challenge of being aware of what opportunities are available in your community and how do we market ourselves as a community and as a province. So making sure that there's these opportunities and there's lots happening, there's a lot of newcomers and a lot of talent. How can we bring these people together?
Great, thank you very much. Krista and Norm, do you have anything to add to this? Or?
I think Jeanette did a great job of capturing what we talked about. And certainly, I think that matchmaking piece, and for employers knowing which programs might best suit the needs that they have. And I did mention in our session that Ignite is actually doing a session on Thursday with regards to the various programs that are available to employers to hire newcomers. So anybody interested in finding out more about which program might best suit their needs could check out Ignite Fredericton's social media or website, and they have information about that session.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Norm?
Yeah, I concur. We had to cut off Extrina at the end, unfortunately, or we got cut off. But she had question about, I'm looking for a tech sector, Fredericton. I can't find one. I can't find the employers. You're not there. Others aren't there. And I hear you 100%. Chris and I know all too well how we've tried to engage the community and say, employers, put up your billboards, put up your signs, be more attractive, be more visible. And it's just a constant work that we have to do to be more attractive, because we do have a tech sector. I don't know how many hundreds of people we've had in our gatherings that we used to have up at Planet Hatch, where people go, I didn't know there's all this here. So there's a constant work, and employers need to lean in more and be more attractive, and not wait for an association or a government agency to be the provider of your recipe for success. So lean in, employers.
Right. Thank you so much. That's a very important point. I will move into the third breakout around housing. Madeline, Liliana, and Joan, as well as Rachel, if you have anything to add or share with the group.
I can start us off and just giving a quick summary. I was also playing the role of facilitator for that session, so please jump in, Liliana or Joan, if I forgot anything. So we started out with naming some of the challenges to affordable and adequate housing that all equity-seeking groups face, with some stats on homelessness just here in the city of Fredericton, with over 200 cases of homelessness in the last 6 months, with 20 to 50 being chronically or episodically unsheltered. We especially focused on affordable housing and the challenges and barriers that newcomers and immigrants and refugees would face. Some of these being access to adequate housing that accommodates larger size families if they have them. So we've talked about how nationally there are 23% of immigrants.
Il y a 23% des immigrants vivent dans des conditions où ils sont trop il y a trop de gens dans le logement, également la question de dépenser au-delà de 50% sur le loyer et les utilités publiques, c'est bien au-delà de la moyenne nationale. Les taux de disponibilité de logement, c'est un enjeu, également au niveau des solutions potentielles. Place pour un plus grand, un rôle plus explicite.
On talked about like the role of having a housing officer or potentially a housing navigator to help people with suitable incomes find shelter or homes. We talked about looking at other jurisdictions for best practices and some that the province has been showing interest in just like being more active on those things, like different sort of local planning tools, like inclusionary zoning, so that as opposed to and moving away from gentrification, for instance. And I'll also just highlight something that was emphasized a few times, is that this is something that we all need to work together on at the community level. So getting communities involved in this. I really like the comment in the last breakout room that was said, is like, who's around the table when we're talking about solutions here, and having newcomers and immigrants and people who experience difficulties and challenges finding housing and maintaining housing, adequate housing, be at those conversation tables and like participate in meaningful consultation there. And also just how this has to happen at the local municipal, all levels of government. So local municipalities, provincial and federal, working together on this issue. Sorry if that sounded like a ramble, Joan or Liliana. If I missed anything, please jump in.
It was a very good ramble. I think the municipality has some levers now that they maybe could be using that aren't. I think there's work being done in the city that's not completed yet that would be very, very helpful because as we heard from the first presentation on, housing is a crunch for everyone and certainly a crunch for newcomers, and we have to be able to welcome people, and if they're staying somewhere that they like and their kids are doing well in school and they have to have an address for their kids to be enrolled in school, remember that. I think it's really important that we get moving on a lot of these things sooner rather than later. And it is an economic development. You build stuff, you renovate stuff, and you create wealth. My own personal opinion, I'm not an economist, sorry.
Thank you, Joan. Liliana, do you have anything to add?
I just want to add that we do hear stories from immigrants coming back to us and saying that they spent way too much time and way too much money in the housing before they move to their permanent housing, and they feel that, you know, they cannot move on if they spent 2 months in Airbnb or motel, or so it's not just that they're spending resources that they didn't count on spending, but they also cannot apply for the Medicare. They cannot apply for, they cannot put children in the school because they don't know what school zone they're gonna belong to. But it's just because they can't find a suitable housing for themselves to get settled and to start settling this community. So it's a big issue.
Thank you very much, Liliana, for sharing those stories. I think it's very important to raise awareness around these issues and to really showcase how deeply it can affect a newcomer or really any member of the community. So yeah, no, housing is a must. Figuring that out is a must, and we have to have all stakeholders on board and around the table to figure it out. Everyone has a role to play. So due to time constraints, I'll move to the fourth and last breakout, racism and systemic discrimination. Doyin, Ariane, and Husoni will spotlight you now, and the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. So in our breakout session, we talked about racism and how it's much deeper, and there's so many conceptions around racism. Sometimes it manifests itself in our social institutions, and there's so many obstacles such that people tend to shift the responsibility to others. We need to take ownership. It's not a matter of shifting it to the municipality or shifting it to the government, but we need to take responsibility. We need to take ownership as a community. And, this should be prioritized in our hiring practices. We've seen cases where, people apply for jobs, but they're being discriminated, they're not being shortlisted, and also in our education system and also in our healthcare outcomes as well. So the top three major barriers that we came up with is misconception around anti-racism. People don't realize that racism is actually an issue. We have it, it is there. We don't need to pretend as if it's not there. And the second thing is hiring procedures. Are we being inclusive when we are creating our HR policies or when we are shortlisting candidates for jobs? And also constant shift in responsibilities. And NPMCC have been doing great work, like Husoni mentioned, that they did a survey recently, and they're working closely with the municipal government. And very soon, the government is already coming up with a clear action plan, or the city is already coming up with a clear action plan, which will be presented to the committee when it's done. And so call to action, moving forward and get some implementation strategy programs to address racism. The government should invest in training opportunities to educate people in the workplace, in the city, on how to overcome this anti-racism. So someone shared in our group how she ensures that she's very fair with hiring. When she's hiring newcomers, she makes sure that she takes her time. She makes sure they are not being, they are given equal chance, equal opportunity as others. She doesn't discriminate at all, and that should be done across board in our region. I think that's all. You can jump in, Adrian, if I miss anything.
Thank you so much, Doyin, Ariane, and Husoni. Do you have anything to add? No?
I think it was there was a good summary of the conversation, but I think the main takeaway that I'd echo is that it's addressing racism is our collective responsibility. So it's not just going to be something that we discuss here and say it's the municipal government's going to take it over. It's going to take collaboration across all sectors, individual citizens, private sector, and all levels of government to actually create inclusive communities. So I think every individual must do some introspection on what role they play and what roles their institutions or organizations play in combating racism.
Thank you, Husoni. Ariane?
Thank you so much, Doyin, for that really good overview of our discussion. And yeah, I was just going to echo what Husoni already said, and perhaps the other key takeaway is to share that from the racism survey that the New Brunswick Multicultural Council did, the survey was about uncovering these experiences of racism in New Brunswick, and Husoni shared some of the very important statistics, one of them being that 95% of the respondents actually said that racism exists within New Brunswick. So I think that that's a really important data for us to keep in mind in this conversation. And to Husoni's point, it involves everyone. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ariane. Before we conclude, I just wanted to open it up to all of the panelists, all of the participants, if anyone had any reflections on what they've heard during this report back session, please, this is the time to chime in. I know we're past the time already, so I can't keep you for too long.
Mais même si je sais que je peux pas vous garder trop longtemps.
If there's anybody. Okay. Yes, Eric.
Look, I was listening intently with a lot of the conversations, and I just want to thank all the presenters. They did a fabulous job, and you know, it's the role of municipal government sort of changing, and you know, I've always said that cities and municipalities across this province, country, and globally can make change happen. And let me give you a quick example on this. So that's climate change. Climate change is happening, and it's happening by the cities. They will be the force to change. So if we want to change things in our province on racism and making people more feeling of belong to their city, of belongingness, it's inclusiveness. So this is something we're working on, and from a city point of view, I know that something's going to come out very soon on this. So, but it's nice to know that our new residents, and I want to affirm that we need to give the vote to our permanent residents. That means they have a say and they have a feeling of belongingness. Because if not, they get a feeling, say, well, if I don't belong here, I'll move to a bigger center where I feel more comfortable. So I think it is something that we have to work on, and housing is very critical. Look, I could tell you some of our rents are highest in the province. So we're just trying to figure out what's going on and how do we help people that, you know, can't afford those high rents and have good housing. So it takes 3 levels of government, but we need to share information. We got to break down those barriers in silos. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I echo all of what you said. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else from the group want to jump in before we conclude? Okay. Well, obviously this conversation can go on forever. An hour and a half is not enough time, but hopefully this conversation can be used as a springboard in the region moving forward. The report that we've developed for the Fredericton region can be used for future planning. And I'm excited to see how all the partners continue to mobilize around this file following this session. We will be collecting all of the notes that are taken in the breakout, and we'll be sharing, you know, some of the findings that maybe we didn't have a chance to share during the report back section. So stay tuned, I guess. But overall, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. And vous pouvez voir les enregistrements de cette session et d'autres sessions sur le site web nouvellesconversations.nb.com. Vous allez trouver également le calendrier de la visite virtuelle et les liens pour vous inscrire aux sessions qui vont suivre, ainsi que toutes les ressources, dont la présentation de Richard et David. So all of the new conversation sessions will be recorded and available. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to connecting with all of you or some of you following this.